I dedicated my life to my children. I paid off debts, took care of my grandkids, gave everything I had. Until one Sunday dinner, I heard the worst accusation. You're an emotional burden. I cried like never before. What they didn't expect is that I'd cut off the support and reveal a strength that would change everything. Before I continue, I wanted to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible to the people you loved most? Have you given everything and received nothing but ingratitude in return? If you've been through this, or if you know someone who has, leave a comment down below. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in this struggle, And this story is about that. About a woman who almost lost herself trying to save everyone except herself. But for you to understand how I reached that breaking point, how a dedicated mother became an emotional burden to her own children, and how I found strength I didn't even know I had, you need to hear everything from the beginning. Because this isn't just my story, it's the story of so many invisible women out there. And maybe, just maybe, it's a little bit of your story too. You know that feeling when you've given everything for years, decades even, and suddenly discover that all of it was seen as a burden? Well, that's exactly what happened to me that Sunday. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived here in Austin, Texas, since my husband passed away. I raised my 2 children alone, worked double shifts, and I was always that mom who was there, The one who pays the bill when the card declines, who covers the mortgage when money's tight, who takes care of the grandkids when the parents have important commitments. I thought I was building a united, strong family. I thought my sacrifice was seen, valued. But that Sunday, sitting at the dinner table in my own home, I discovered I was completely wrong. Karen, my daughter, arrived with that look of someone who has something stuck in their throat. Lucas, my son, barely looked at me while scrolling through his phone. I'd made a special lunch, that roasted chicken with potatoes they loved when they were little. The table looked beautiful, smelled amazing, and I was happy, naive actually, thinking we'd have a family moment. I placed the serving dish in the center of the table, smiled, and asked how their week had been. That's when Karen exchanged that look with Lucas. That kind of look where there's a bomb coming. My heart squeezed, but I pretended I hadn't seen anything. I wanted to believe I was just imagining things. "Mom, we need to talk," Karen said, with a voice that was too firm, almost rehearsed. I dropped my fork, my stomach churning. Lucas finally looked up from his phone and sighed deeply, as if preparing to drop something heavy. "About what, sweetie?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Karen took a deep breath and fired. "About you, Mom. We're tired of carrying this emotional burden you put on us." I blinked several times, trying to process those words. Emotional burden. Me? The woman who paid off both their debts, who helped with mortgages, who took care of the kids while they found themselves. My mouth went dry instantly. Lucas jumped into the conversation, and each word was like a stab. "Seriously, Mom. You're always calling, demanding attention, making us feel guilty about everything. We have our own lives, our own problems. You need to understand that." I felt my hands trembling. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, almost disappearing. I just wanted to help you. I always wanted to be close." Karen rolled her eyes at me and responded, "Help? Mom, you're emotionally dependent on us. That's not healthy. You need to live your own life and stop trying to control ours." Control? Me? That word echoed in my head like a scream. My children, the ones I carried in my arms, the ones I protected from everything, were accusing me of being manipulative. I tried to argue, explain that everything I did was out of love, out of dedication. But the more I spoke, the more irritated they seemed. Karen crossed her arms and said, "We know you've done a lot, but that doesn't give you the right to use it against us all the time." Use it against them? I never, ever threw anything in their faces. I just wanted to be a mom. I just wanted to be present. Lucas added, "We're asking for space, Mom. It's time for you to live your life and let us live ours." Each of their words was like a brick being thrown at my chest. I looked around the table at that food I'd prepared with so much care and felt a pain so deep I could barely breathe. They didn't see sacrifice. They saw burden. The conversation escalated. Voices rose, and at some point I simply couldn't hold it anymore. The tears started rolling, hot, uncontrollable. I wasn't crying regular sadness. It was visceral pain, a collapse of everything I believed to be true. Karen huffed, grabbed her purse and said, "We just wanted to be honest with you, Mom. You don't need to be dramatic." Dramatic? My world was falling apart and she thought I was being dramatic? Lucas got up too, mumbled a, "We'll talk later," and followed his sister. I heard the front door slam, and then silence. A deafening, heavy silence that seemed to swallow the entire house. I sat there alone, staring at that table full of food no one had touched. The tears kept falling, wetting my face, my neck, staining my blouse. I felt small, invisible, disposable. I dedicated my entire life to them. I worked 2 jobs after my husband died to make sure they had everything they needed. I paid for college, cars, weddings, credit card debt. I took care of the grandkids while they needed time to breathe. And now, after all of that, I was an emotional burden? That was the worst accusation anyone could make against me. Because it wasn't about money, it wasn't about time, it was about who I was as a person, as a mother. In the following days, I was kind of lost, you know? I tried calling Karen, but she didn't answer. I texted Lucas, and he'd only respond with "okay" or "we'll talk later." It was like I'd become a nuisance, someone they needed to keep at a distance. I talked to some friends from the community club here in Austin, and one of them, Margaret, told me something that stuck in my head. "Evelyn, dear, sometimes we teach people to disrespect us, and sometimes, to get respect back, we need to take a step back." That got to me. Had I taught my children to disrespect me? Had I, by always being available, always solving everything, become invisible? I started thinking about everything I'd done, about all the times I put myself aside to be there for them. That's when I made a decision. A difficult, painful, but necessary decision. I wasn't going to be the elderly mother they could step on whenever they wanted anymore. I wasn't going to accept being treated like a burden, as if my presence were a weight. If they thought I was emotionally dependent on them, that I was manipulative, then it was time to show them what I was capable of. It was time to cut the cord. Not the cord of love, because I'd never stop loving my children, but the cord of financial dependence they had on me. They thought I was weak, that I needed them. Well, it was time to prove they were dead wrong. And what they didn't know is that this decision would change everything. I grabbed my laptop that same night, opened my bank account, and looked at all those automatic transfers I'd been making month after month. Money for Karen, money for Lucas, bill payments, tuition, little helps that had become silent obligations. My hand trembled over the mouse. It was so much money, so much of my effort going away, month after month, without a simple thank you. I took a deep breath and clicked. I canceled everything, all the automatic transfers, all the recurring payments. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Was I doing the right thing? Would they understand? Or would this just prove I really was the villain in their story? But one thing I knew, I couldn't continue like this anymore. I couldn't keep being treated like a true story of total humiliation within my own family. The first few days after I canceled the transfers were the hardest of my life. Not because of the lack of money. God knows I'd worked hard my whole life and had my savings, but because of the guilt that weighed on my chest like a stone. Every time I picked up my phone, my heart would race. Had Karen noticed yet? Had Lucas already tried to pay some bill and had his card declined? I'd catch myself staring at the phone screen, waiting for a desperate call, an angry message, anything. But for the first 2 days, nothing. Absolute silence. And that silence somehow hurt even more. It was as if they hadn't even noticed my absence, you know? As if I was so invisible that even my money went unnoticed. But on the morning of the 3rd day, my phone exploded. It was 7 in the morning when the calls started coming. First Karen, then Lucas, then Karen again. I looked at the screen vibrating on my nightstand and felt my stomach turn. Part of me wanted to answer right away, fix everything, take back my decision. But another part, that part that had been humiliated at that Sunday dinner, held me firm. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. And when I finally listened to the messages a few hours later, each word confirmed what I already knew. They only called when they needed something. Karen was hysterical. "Mom, what happened? The daycare payment for the girls didn't go through. They're saying they'll take them out of the program if I don't pay today." Lucas was more direct, colder. "Mom, I need you to transfer that money urgently. The mortgage is late, and the bank is threatening to foreclose. I sat on the porch of my house here in Austin, with a cup of coffee shaking in my hand, and realized something devastating. My children only remembered I existed when the bills didn't add up. There was no, "Hi, Mom, how are you?" There was no, "Sorry for what we said." It was just demands, urgency, desperation. And you know what's worse? I almost gave in. I almost grabbed my phone and transferred the money because that was my nature, to fix, protect, save. But then, I remembered their words. "You're an emotional burden." I remembered the way they looked at me, as if I were a problem to be managed, not a mother to be loved. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Emotional survival of an elderly mother who needed to protect what remained of her dignity. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist that same week. I'd never done therapy in my life, always thought it was for people who couldn't handle their own stuff. But I needed to talk to someone. I needed to understand if what I was doing was right or if I was being cruel. Dr. Patterson was a calm woman with a kind look who received me in her office in a quiet Austin neighborhood. When I told her the whole story, the dinner, the accusations, the decision to cut off financial support, she looked at me with a compassion that made me cry again. "Evelyn," she said, "you're not being cruel. You're setting boundaries, and boundaries are an act of self-love, not selfishness." Those words shook me. Self-love. I'd spent so much time loving others that I'd completely forgotten to love myself. The weeks went by, and the pressure increased. Karen sent me daily messages, some tearful, others angry. "Mom, I can't pay the bills alone. Are you doing this on purpose to punish me? This is manipulation." Lucas tried the colder, more calculated approach. "Mom, we need to talk like adults. I know you're upset, but this is affecting my family. Do you really want us to lose the house?" And each message, each unanswered call, each ignored email was an internal battle. Guilt ate away at me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweaty, heart racing, imagining my grandkids without school, Karen being evicted, Lucas losing everything. But then I'd take a deep breath and remember, they're adults. Adults who treated me like a burden. Adults who needed to learn to walk on their own 2 feet. My friends from the community club were my salvation during this period. Margaret, Dorothy, and Susan, 3 incredible women who understood what it was like to carry a family on your back and still be seen as the problem. We'd meet every Thursday for tea and talk about life, and it was with them that I vented everything. "Dear, you're doing the right thing," said Dorothy, holding my hand firmly. "My children did the same thing to me years ago. I cut off the money, and you know what happened? They grew up, they matured, they learned to value me." Susan agreed, telling her own emotional story of how an ungrateful son only came to respect her after she said no. These women gave me strength when I needed it most. They reminded me I wasn't alone in this fight. Meanwhile, across town, my children's lives were beginning to crumble. Karen, who lived in Dallas, was watching everything fall apart little by little. Without the monthly money I sent, she couldn't pay for the fancy gym membership she had, or the ballet classes for her daughters, or the beauty salon where she got her nails done every week. Her credit card, which I always helped pay, was blocked. Bills started piling up late. And the worst part, David, her husband, started questioning where the money that sustained their lifestyle came from. Karen had hidden from him for years that I was the one holding everything together. Now the truth was coming out, and her marriage was cracking along with the finances. Lucas, over in San Antonio, wasn't doing any better. He'd financed a car he could barely afford, lived in a house that was above his means, and lived off appearances. Freelance work didn't give him the stability he pretended to have, and it was my money, my sweat, my effort that covered the holes month after month. When the bank called warning that the mortgage was 3 months late, Lucas panicked. He tried to negotiate, kicked the can down the road, but the truth was clear. Without Mom to save him, he was sinking. And for the first time in his adult life, Lucas tasted the bitter flavor of responsibility. He had no one left to blame, no one to turn to, no one to clean up the mess he'd created himself. I watched it all from a distance, in silence, with a broken heart. Because I was still a mother, you know. I still loved my children with every fiber of my being. But I knew that if I gave in now, if I went back, everything would have been in vain. They needed to feel firsthand what it was like to live without a safety net. They needed to understand the value of what I did, not as an obligation, but as a choice. And I, this elderly mother who'd always been strong but never been seen, needed to learn to live for myself. The therapist told me it was a grieving process, grieving for the family I thought I had, for the relationship that was never what I imagined. And yes, it was painful. It tore at my soul, but it was necessary. At night, alone in my silent house, I'd sometimes wonder if I'd done the right thing. Was I a cruel mother? Was I being selfish? But then I'd look at my bank account, see the money that was finally staying with me, and I'd feel something strange, freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying anyone on my back. I wasn't sacrificing myself until there was nothing left of me. I was, little by little, learning to breathe again. And that feeling, as scary as it was also liberating. My children needed to learn to fly alone. And me? I needed to discover who Evelyn Carter was when no one was watching, when no one was asking. Because for so long I was just the mom. Now, it was time to be myself. While I tried to rebuild my inner peace here in Austin, on the other side, my children's lives were literally falling apart. And look, I'm not going to lie to you. Part of me felt immense pain watching it happen, but another part, deep down, knew it was necessary. Karen had always been the one who lived off appearances, you know? The one who posted Instagram photos of the tidy house, the kids in designer clothes, the brand new car parked in the garage. Everything always perfect, always impeccable. What no one knew, not even her friends, not her husband's family, is that behind that facade of success was me, an elderly mother sending money every single month to keep that illusion standing. Now, without my support, the mask was falling. And when it falls, my friend, it falls hard. The first thing Karen lost was the car, that black SUV, huge, that she loved showing off on social media with the caption, "Blessed" underneath. 3 months of late payments, and the bank didn't even want to negotiate. A tow truck came on a Tuesday afternoon, right when she was going to pick up the girls from school, and took the car away in front of the neighbors. Karen called me crying, desperate, saying it had been the biggest humiliation of her life. "Mom, everyone saw. All the neighbors were looking out their windows. I can't even leave the house, I'm so embarrassed." And you know what I did? I took a deep breath and said, "Karen, I know it's hard, but you need to learn to live within your means." She hung up on me, but I needed to be firm. I needed to teach what no one had taught until then. Soon after came the cut of the kids' classes. The girls, Lily and Sophie, my beautiful granddaughters, had to leave the fancy private school where they studied and were transferred to a public school in the neighborhood. Karen blamed me for everything, saying I was destroying my granddaughter's future, that I was a cruel and insensitive grandmother. That hurt more than anything, because it touched my greatest weakness, my love for my granddaughters. I wanted to run there, pay for the school, fix everything. But Dr. Patterson reminded me of something important. "Evelyn, helping occasionally with essential things is different from bankrolling an unrealistic lifestyle. The girls will be fine, but Karen needs to learn to be responsible." And she was right. The kids weren't going to die from studying at a public school. I myself studied my whole life in public school and turned out fine. But Karen didn't see it that way. She saw everything as a fall from status, a total humiliation I was imposing on her on purpose. The beauty treatment stopped. Goodbye Botox, goodbye lip filler, goodbye eyelash extensions. The gel nails became natural nails. The designer clothes became thrift store finds, and each small loss was documented in the tearful calls she'd make to me, hoping I'd feel sorry and go back to paying for everything. "Mom, I don't recognize my life anymore. Everything I built is disappearing." I'd take a deep breath and think, "My daughter, you didn't build anything. I built it, and now you need to learn to build on your own." But I never said that out loud. I just maintained my firm silence, my well-established boundary. On the other side, in San Antonio, Lucas was living his own private hell. The house, that beautiful house with a huge yard he'd bought to impress his friends, was about to be taken by the bank. He'd received 3 foreclosure notices, and now it was a matter of weeks before the bailiffs showed up at the door. Lucas, who'd always been the proud son, the one who never admitted needing help, was completely desperate. He tried everything, asked friends for loans, they declined, tried to sell the car, but owed more than the car was worth, even considered taking out a loan with absurd interest rates. With each frustrated attempt, reality became clearer. He'd lived years above his means, supported by a mother he treated like a bank guarantee. The life of appearances Lucas led started cracking on all sides. He'd always been that guy who invited friends over for barbecue at his place, who paid for the round at the bar, who traveled and posted photos at resorts. But now he could barely pay the electric bill. Friends started disappearing. Funny how convenience friendships vanish when money runs out, right? And Lucas found himself completely alone, drowning in debt, not knowing where to turn. And for the first time in his life, that ungrateful son who called me an emotional burden was feeling firsthand what it was like to really have a weight on his back. A financial, emotional, existential weight. A weight he'd created himself. I knew all of this not because they told me directly. No, they were still in wounded pride mode, but through small comments, through cut-off messages, through desperate calls in the middle of the night that I didn't answer. And can I tell you something? It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, because every fiber of my being as a mother wanted to run, fix, save. It's instinctive, you know? You see your child drowning and you want to throw the life preserver. But I'd learned in the most painful way possible that sometimes throwing the life preserver is what keeps the person from learning to swim. And my children needed to learn to swim, alone, even if that meant swallowing water for a while. Karen lost more than the car and the kids' classes. She lost the identity she'd built on top of lies and borrowed money. Without being able to frequent the same places, without being able to keep up with her friends at expensive restaurants and weekend trips, she started being excluded from the social circle. The friends stopped calling, invitations disappeared, and Karen found herself isolated, alone, facing a reality she'd always run from. David, her husband, started demanding explanations, asking questions she didn't have the courage to answer. Where did that money come from, Karen? How were we able to pay for all of this? And when the truth came out, that it was the suffocating mother-in-law who was bankrolling everything, the marriage went into total collapse. Lucas also lost more than the house. He lost his self-respect, the illusion of self-sufficiency he'd been so keen to flaunt. That man who told me I needed to live my life and let him live his was now discovering that his life was sustained by mine. And it wasn't just the financial issue, you know? It was the realization that he'd never been the man he pretended to be. The freelance jobs he did barely paid the basics. The house, the car, the trips. It was all facade. It was all me, back there, invisible, holding things together. And now, without me, the house of cards was collapsing. And he had no idea how to rebuild, because he'd never really built anything alone. But you know what's saddest about all this? Not even then, not even seeing everything crumble, did they come to me with humility. They didn't come to apologize for the dinner, for the accusations, for the way they treated me. They came demanding, as if I had an eternal debt to them, as if my role as mother was to bankroll their irresponsibility forever. And that's when I realized something fundamental. This true story I was living wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about recognition, about dignity. They needed to fall to understand the ground. And me? I needed to let them fall so I could finally lift my own head. Because an elderly mother also has the right to be seen, valued, respected. And if they didn't learn through love, they'd have to learn through pain. It was on a Thursday afternoon, almost 2 months after I cut off financial support, that I heard the doorbell ring. I was in the kitchen making chamomile tea, trying to calm my nerves after another heavy therapy session, when the sound echoed through the house. My heart jumped. That kind of jump you feel when you know something important is about to happen. I looked out the window and saw her car parked on the street, an old, dented sedan I didn't even know existed. It wasn't the shiny black SUV she loved showing off. Karen had come to Austin. She'd driven almost 3 hours from Dallas to here, and from the way she got out of the car, shoulders slumped, eyes red, wrinkled clothes, I knew this wasn't a social visit. It was pure desperation. I opened the door before she even knocked, and what I saw broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. My daughter, always so vain, always so put together, was unrecognizable. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, deep dark circles marking her face. She looked at me and immediately started crying. Not that delicate, controlled cry, but a convulsive, desperate one. "Mom, I can't take it anymore, she managed to say between sobs. I stood there at the door for a few seconds, fighting against all my maternal instincts that were screaming to hug her, to say everything would be okay, to solve all her problems with a single check. But I took a deep breath and held firm. "Come in, Karen," was all I could say. With the calmest voice I could produce, she stumbled in, as if carrying the world on her back, and threw herself on the living room couch. We sat there in silence for a few endless minutes, just the sound of her crying filling the space between us. I made a glass of water, put it on the coffee table, and sat in the armchair across from her, not next to her, deliberately. I needed to maintain a physical distance that represented the emotional distance I was trying to create. Karen drank all the water at once, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and finally looked at me. "Mom, I need your help, please. I'm losing everything." Her voice was thin, broken, desperate, and each word was a knife in my chest as an elderly mother who just wanted to see her children well. "Tell me what's happening," I asked, keeping my tone neutral, almost professional. Karen took a deep breath, trembling, and started pouring everything out. The daycare had given an ultimatum. Either she paid the 3 months overdue by the end of the week, or Lily and Sophie would be removed from the program. David had discovered the whole truth about the finances and had left the house, taking just one suitcase and leaving her alone with the bills and the kids. The cards were all blocked. She'd sold jewelry, clothes, shoes, everything that had any value, but even that wasn't enough. "I have nothing left, Mom. Nothing. And the girls, they can't be without school. They're innocent in all this." And that's when she hit me hard, because touching my granddaughters was my weak spot, and she knew it very well. I felt emotion rising in my throat, my eyes burning, but I held myself together. "Karen, you called me an emotional burden. You said I was manipulative, that I didn't let you live your lives, and now you're here asking for exactly what you said I used to control you. Money." The words came out harsher than I intended, but they needed to be said. Karen sobbed louder, and then did something that completely shocked me. She slid off the couch and knelt on my living room floor. Knelt. My adult daughter, 35 years old, was on her knees in front of me, hands together as if in prayer, begging. "Mom, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I said horrible things. I was ungrateful. I know all of that. But please, please don't make my daughters pay for my mistakes. They need this school, this structure. I'm begging you." Seeing my daughter there in that state was one of the most painful sights of my life. Part of me wanted to give in immediately, fix everything, go back to being that mom who always saved the day. But another part, that part that had grown during those 2 months of therapy and self-discovery, knew that if I simply gave her the money, nothing would change. It would just be more of the same. She'd continue dependent, irresponsible, and I'd continue being used. "Get up off the floor, Karen," I said firmly. She hesitated but obeyed, going back to the couch with her face soaked. "I'll help you," I said, and I saw her eyes brighten with hope. "But it'll be my way, with my rules. And if you don't agree, we end this conversation now." I explained to her that I'd pay the daycare tuition directly to the institution. Not a cent would pass through her hands. She'd have 3 months to get a job, any job, and start paying her own bills. I'd help with daycare for 6 months, but after that period she'd have to take over completely. No cash in hand. "No, just this once, Mom. No excuses. If she wanted my help, it would have to be on my terms, with total transparency and her taking responsibility. And one more thing," I added, looking firmly into her tearful eyes. "You're going to do therapy. It's not a suggestion. It's a condition. You need to understand the destructive patterns that brought you here. If you don't, I won't help with anything." It was tough. It was direct. But it was necessary. This was the only way to truly help my ungrateful daughter grow. Karen stayed silent for a long moment, processing everything. I saw on her face the internal battle, pride fighting against desperation, anger wrestling with need. Finally, she nodded slowly. I accept everything. Just, thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me, even after everything." She started crying again, but this time it seemed different. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't drama. It was genuine relief mixed with shame. I got up, grabbed some tissues, and handed them to her. "Karen, I'll never give up on you. You're my daughter, and I love you more than anything in this world. But love doesn't mean accepting being disrespected. Love also means letting you face the consequences of your choices. That's how we grow." She nodded, wiping her face, trying to compose herself. In the following days, I put everything into practice. I called the daycare, explained the situation, and made the direct payment for the 3 overdue months, plus the current month. I sent Karen a list of therapists in Dallas who accepted insurance or had affordable prices. I helped her put together a decent resume and look for jobs in the area, but at no point did I go back to the old pattern of solving everything for her. Each step was hers, with my guidance, not my execution. And you know something? It was liberating. Because for the first time, I was truly helping, not just patching holes. I was teaching her to fish, not giving her the fish. And this emotional story of rebuilding was just beginning, for her and for me. But while Karen tried to get back on her feet in Dallas, Lucas continued in absolute silence in San Antonio. He hadn't come, hadn't called, hadn't asked for help. And that worried me deeply. Because if Karen had fallen to her knees but still had the courage to ask for help, what would become of Lucas, who'd always been more proud, more closed off? Sometimes silence hurts more than screaming. And I knew his storm was still coming. I just didn't know when, or with what intensity it would reach me. With Karen finally walking a path of responsibility, even if still wobbly, I found myself with something I hadn't had in decades: time. Time for myself. Time that wasn't filled with emergency calls, last-minute bank transfers, or worries about which child would need rescuing this time. And you know what's funny? In the first few days, that time scared me. I'd wake up in the morning and stare at the ceiling, not knowing what to do with myself. Who was Evelyn Carter when she wasn't being a mom, when she wasn't solving problems, when she wasn't sacrificing herself? That question echoed in my head like an echo in an empty cave. But Dr. Patterson had prepared me for this moment. "Evelyn, you're going to feel lost at first. It's normal. You spent decades defined by the role of mother. Now it's time to discover who you are beyond that." I started slowly, with small steps. One morning, passing by the community center here in Austin, I saw a poster announcing beginner yoga classes. Normally I'd walk right past, thinking, that's not for me, I'm too old, I don't have flexibility. But something different happened that day. I stopped, looked at the poster and thought, why not? I went in, talked to the instructor, a sweet girl named Amanda, about 30-something, and signed up right there, without thinking too much, without giving fear time to hold me back. The first class was humiliating, to be honest. I could barely touch my toes, while ladies my age were doing poses that looked like circus acts. But you know what happened? I laughed. I laughed at myself, at my clumsiness, and that was liberating. It had been so long since I'd laughed like that, without guilt, without weight. Yoga classes became my sacred time 3 times a week. It was an hour when I didn't think about my children, their bills, the problems they might be facing. It was just me, my body, my breath. Amanda always said, yoga isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. And man, I needed to learn to be present in my own life. I started noticing subtle changes. I slept better. The constant tension in my shoulders began to ease. My posture improved. But the biggest change was internal. I was reconnecting with my body, something I'd ignored for years while taking care of everyone except myself. And on that purple yoga mat, sweating and breathing, I began to find myself again. Inspired by yoga, I decided to explore other things. I enrolled in a healthy cooking course at a charming studio on South Congress, one of Austin's most vibrant areas. The instructor, a retired chef named Marcus, taught how to make delicious dishes without all that fat and sugar I used to use. I discovered that cooking could be creative, even meditative, when you weren't just doing it to please other people. I made a mushroom risotto that turned out so good I surprised myself. I experimented with spices I'd never used: turmeric, cardamom, fresh herbs that I started growing myself in a small garden on the porch. And you know the best part? I was cooking for myself. I'd set the table nicely, light a candle, and have dinner alone without feeling that tightness in my chest of loneliness. I was learning that being alone didn't mean being lonely. The book club was another transformative discovery. Margaret, my friend from the tea group, invited me to participate, and I accepted kind of awkwardly because I'd never been a voracious reader. But the group was incredible. 6 women of varying ages, all with emotional stories and different perspectives on life. We'd meet every Monday night at someone's house, discuss the book of the month, and invariably the conversation would drift to our own lives. That's where I met Patricia, a 58-year-old woman who'd been through something similar to me, ungrateful children who only valued her after she set boundaries. Hearing her story, seeing I wasn't alone in this fight, was like finding a mirror that reflected my pain, but also my strength. These women became my support network, my tribe. I started exploring Austin in a way I'd never done before. Even though I'd lived here for so many years, I lived in an automatic routine. House, grocery store, bank, house. Now I'd walk the Lady Bird Lake Trail on Saturday mornings, watching the ducks and rowers. I'd visit farmers markets, chat with vendors, try exotic fruits I'd never tasted. I went to a live music show at a small bar on 6th Street, alone, can you imagine, and discovered I loved blues. I sat at the bar, ordered a wine, and simply absorbed the music, the voices, the energy of the place. People would look at me from time to time, probably thinking, what's a lady my age doing there? But I didn't care. I was living. Finally, I was living. But not everything was roses, you know? There were difficult days, days when guilt came back with full force. I'd wake up thinking about the girls, my granddaughters, and wonder if I was being selfish. There were moments when I'd grab my phone to send money to Karen, just to make things a little easier. But then I'd hold back. Dr. Patterson taught me a technique. When guilt came, I should pause, breathe, and ask, will this truly help, or will it just postpone the necessary growth? And most of the time, the answer was clear, postpone. So I'd put away my phone, take a deep breath, and go back to my life. Because yes, I had a life now. A life that didn't revolve around being a mom 24 hours a day. And that was scary, but it was also beautiful. One afternoon, going through old boxes in the closet, I found a sketchbook I'd used over 30 years ago. I used to draw. Nothing professional, just doodles, portraits, landscapes I'd see and want to capture. I'd stopped when the kids were born because I didn't have time for those things. I sat on the porch with that old notebook in my hands, flipping through drawings yellowed by time, and cried. I cried for young Evelyn, who'd had dreams, hobbies, passions beyond being a mom. I cried for all the parts of me I'd buried over the years. But then I dried my tears, went to an art supply store and bought pencils, paper, erasers. I started drawing again, and it wasn't good, not at first. I was rusty, insecure, but it was mine. It was a part of me that was resurrecting. The months went by, and I felt something growing inside me that I hadn't felt in decades. Joy, genuine joy, not that borrowed joy that comes from seeing your kids happy. It was my own joy, based on things I chose to do, people I chose to have around, moments I created for myself. Of course, I still thought about my children, still loved them with every fiber of my being. But now I understood I could love them without erasing myself. I could be a mom without stopping being Evelyn. And this elderly mother that everyone had seen as an emotional burden was proving, to herself, more than anyone, that she had much more life inside her than she imagined. And while I flourished here in Austin, rediscovering who I was, Karen fought in Dallas to stay on her feet, following the rules I'd established. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. Nothing glamorous, but honest, stable. She'd send photos of the girls every week, small updates showing she was trying. And Lucas? Lucas continued in his disturbing silence in San Antonio, like a storm forming on the horizon. I knew that at some point he'd explode or beg. And when that moment came, I needed to be strong enough not to give in to the old pattern, because my own emotional story of rebirth depended on maintaining these boundaries, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. 3 months after that desperate visit from Karen to my house, when I thought things were finally stabilizing, I got a call in the middle of the night. It was 2:40 in the morning when the phone rang, lighting up my dark room, and my heart raced in that way it only races when you know something very bad has happened. It was Karen, and the crying on the other end of the line was so intense that at first I couldn't even understand what she was saying. Mom, he's gone. David's gone for good. He took everything. I don't know what to do. Between choppy sobs, she managed to tell me she'd come home from work and found the house half empty. David had taken furniture, electronics, even the kitchen pots. He'd left a cold note on the table saying he couldn't take that sham of a marriage anymore. and that she should talk to his lawyer. My daughter was completely destroyed. I wanted to jump in the car and drive to Dallas that exact moment, but I held myself back. Dr. Patterson had warned me about these moments, the acute crisis moments where all my maternal instincts would scream for me to fix everything immediately. "Breathe, Karen. Take a deep breath with me," I said, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. We stayed on the phone for almost an hour, me just listening to her pour out all the pain, all the anger, all the humiliation of a marriage that had imploded. David wasn't a saint. I'd always known that. He was a car salesman who lived off irregular commissions and spent more than he earned. But Karen had clung to the image of the perfect marriage, the perfect family, even when everything was cracking from the inside. Now there was no more pretending. The mask had fallen completely, and underneath there were only ruins. In the following days, Karen told me the whole truth, truths she'd hidden not just from me, but from herself. David had been having affairs she'd suspected for months. The fights were constant, especially after he found out I was the one bankrolling their lifestyle. He felt humiliated, emasculated, and threw it in her face every time they argued. "You're a spoiled child who never grew up. You're hanging on mommy's apron strings," he'd yell. And as much as it hurt to admit, there was truth in that. Karen was 35 years old, but had never truly matured, never taken full responsibility for her own life. And now, besides being financially broke, she was emotionally shattered too. It was total humiliation, losing the marriage, the house, the illusion of a perfect life, all at once. Karen couldn't work properly. She'd cry in the vet clinic bathroom, arrive late because she wasn't sleeping at night. Her boss, an understanding veterinarian named Dr. Morrison, gave her a gentle ultimatum. She needed to recover or she'd lose the job. That's when she finally did something I never expected. She called me and said, "Mom, I need to come home. Not forever, just for a while. I need you. Not your money, you." Those words broke me and healed me at the same time. For the first time, my ungrateful daughter was asking for presents, not a financial solution. She was asking for emotional support, not a check. And that was exactly the change I'd hoped for, prayed for, begged to happen. I prepared the guest room in my Austin house with all the care in the world. I put on clean sheets, fresh flowers on the nightstand, soft towels in the bathroom. Karen arrived on a Friday afternoon with the girls, Lily and Sophie, who ran into my arms screaming, "Grandma!" with that pure joy only children have. But when I looked at Karen, my heart bled. She'd lost a lot of weight. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken from so much crying. She was carrying 2 old suitcases and an expression of absolute defeat. "Welcome home," I said, hugging all 3. And for the first time in months, I felt I was doing the right thing. Not rescuing, not fixing, but welcoming. There's a huge difference between the two, and I was finally learning what it was. The first few days were intense. Karen would sleep late, emotionally and physically exhausted. I'd take care of the girls, make breakfast, take them to play in the park. But I made it clear that this was temporary, that Karen needed to recover but couldn't get comfortable. At night, when the girls were asleep, the 2 of us would talk on the porch, and it was in these conversations that the real wounds started to appear. "Mom, I always thought I had to be perfect," she confessed one night, wrapped in a blanket. "I thought if I had the pretty house, the husband, the well-dressed kids, I'd be happy. But I never was. It was all so empty." I held her hand and asked, "And why did you think you needed to be perfect?" She stayed silent for a long time before answering. "Because I thought that's the only way you'd love me." That destroyed me. My daughter had spent her whole life trying to impress her mother, building a life of lies to appear successful, when all I ever wanted was for her to be happy and authentic. "Karen, I always loved you. Always. Not for what you had or showed, but for who you are." She started crying again, but this time it was a different cry. It was liberating, cathartic. "I was so ungrateful to you, Mom. I said horrible things. I called you an emotional burden when you were the only thing keeping me standing. I'm a terrible daughter." I shook my head. "You're not terrible. You were lost, and maybe I contributed to that, making things too easy, not letting you learn to fall and get up on your own. We both made mistakes, Karen, but we can fix them together too." In the following weeks, we established a routine. Karen resumed therapy. I paid for the sessions, but she had to go, had to do the emotional work. She looked for a lawyer to deal with the divorce and discovered David was more in debt than she imagined. There was nothing to split, just debts. It was a hard blow, but also liberating in a way. She started looking for work in Austin, closer to me, in areas that actually interested her, not just whatever paid more. She discovered she liked working with animals and enrolled in a veterinary technician course. The girls adapted well, making friends at the new school, lighter without the heavy climate of their parents' marriage. And Karen, for the first time I can remember, started to genuinely smile. But the big turning point came on a Sunday afternoon, almost 2 months after she'd arrived. We were both in the kitchen preparing lunch, her cutting vegetables, me seasoning the chicken, when she stopped, put the knife on the cutting board, and looked at me with teary eyes. "Mom, I need to ask your forgiveness, truly. Not just for the words at that dinner, but for all the years I treated you like a guarantee, like an obligation. You gave me everything and I never valued it. I was an ungrateful, selfish daughter, and I took you completely for granted. I'm sorry, so sorry." Her voice broke at the end, and she broke down in tears. I dropped what I was doing, hugged my daughter, and cried along. They were tears of pain, yes, but also of healing, of something finally being fixed after being broken for so long. "I forgive you, my daughter, and thank you for acknowledging that. It's all I needed to hear," I whispered in her ear. We stayed there hugging for long minutes, 2 wounded hearts starting to heal together. When we separated, Karen had a different expression on her face. It was no longer the mask of perfection she'd always worn, nor the expression of defeat she'd brought when she arrived. It was something more real, more human. It was growth. And in that kitchen, smelling of garlic and rosemary, while the Austin sun came through the window, I felt my daughter was finally starting to become the woman she'd always had the potential to be. But while Karen flourished here with me, Lucas remained lost in San Antonio. And I knew his chapter was still to come, more difficult and painful than Karen's, because sometimes those who fall deepest need more time to ask for help. A week after that hug in the kitchen, I realized there were still things unsaid between me and Karen. Things stuck, lodged in our throats for years, that needed to come out for healing to be complete. Forgiveness had been given, tears had been shed, but the raw, naked, complete truth still hadn't been put on the table. And I knew, from all those therapy sessions, that without this difficult conversation, without this honest confrontation, we'd risk repeating the same patterns in the future. So on a Saturday afternoon, after the girls had gone to sleep at a friend's house, I called Karen to sit with me on the porch. I made mint tea, warm and aromatic, and when she sat in the chair across from mine, I said, "We need to talk, really, about everything." Karen immediately tensed, her shoulders stiffening, her hands gripping the teacup. "Mom, I already apologized. I already said that." I raised my hand, gently interrupting. "I know, and I accept your apology. But Karen, forgiveness doesn't erase history, doesn't erase patterns, doesn't erase years of behaviors that hurt us both. If we don't talk about all of this, really, we'll just sweep it under the rug. And I don't want that. Not anymore." She nodded slowly, nervously biting her lower lip. "Okay, that's fine. What do you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say, but knowing it was necessary. "I want to talk about how you treated me in recent years, about the emotional abuse, the manipulation, the ingratitude, about how you used me like a faceless bank and discarded me when I needed affection." The words came out harder than I intended, but they were true. Karen paled, tears already welling in her eyes, but I continued. "Do you remember how many times I called just to see how you were and you brushed it off, said you were busy? How many times I offered emotional help and you only wanted money? How many birthdays, Mother's Days, holidays you spent away because you had other commitments? But when you needed to pay a bill, I was the first person you looked for?" Each question was a knife, I knew, but it needed to be said. Karen covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Mom, I know. I know all of that." "No, Karen, you don't know. Because if you really knew, you would have changed before you got to where you got." I continued, now with a firmer voice, years of hurt finally finding voice. "You treated me like an emotional burden at that dinner. But you know who really was the burden? You too. You and your brother. You drained me until there was nothing left. I worked 2 jobs after your father died to pay for your college. I sacrificed my dreams, my time, my health. And why? Because I thought I was building a loving, present, grateful family. But you were never grateful. You always thought it was my obligation, as if I'd been born to serve you. Tears were streaming down my face now too, hot and liberating. Karen was sobbing loudly, but I needed to finish. That dinner wasn't the beginning, Karen. It was just the last straw. It was years of disrespect, of treating me like I was invisible, culminating in that moment. Karen finally took her hands off her face, eyes red and swollen, and looked at me with an expression of pure agony. You're right, Mom. About everything. I was horrible. Worse than horrible. I was an ungrateful daughter who only thought about myself, my needs, my image. I didn't even ask how you were, if you needed something, if you were alone or sad. I just assumed you'd always be there, that it was your role to be there, no matter what I did. Her voice was broken, torn by guilt. And you know what's worse? I knew it was wrong. Deep down I knew. But it was easier to pretend I didn't know. It was easier to take the money and keep living my little fake life. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of crickets at night filling the space between us. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and took a deep breath, feeling a strange relief from finally having said all that. Karen, I need you to understand something very important. I love you. I always loved you. I always will. You're my daughter, and that will never change. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Love doesn't mean erasing yourself. I let this happen for so long because I confused love with unconditional sacrifice. But now I understand that true love also includes boundaries, mutual respect, reciprocity. Karen nodded vigorously, wiping her face with her shirt sleeve. I understand, Mom, and I promise I'll do differently. Not just promise, but really do differently. I want to believe you, Karen, truly. But trust is rebuilt with actions, not words. You said beautiful things now, but I need to see consistency. I need to see you taking responsibility for your life, raising your daughters with better values than the ones you lived, treating the people around you with respect and gratitude. My voice was firm, but loving. Karen got up from her chair and came to me, kneeling by my side and holding my hands. I'll prove it to you, Mom. Every day. I'll be the daughter you deserve to have, the daughter you always deserved. I'll make you proud of me. I stroked her hair, feeling my heart squeeze and expand at the same time. I've always been proud of you, dear. I just needed you to be proud of yourself, too. We talked for 2 more hours on that porch, untangling years of resentments, misunderstandings, and toxic patterns. Karen told me about the pressure she'd always felt to be perfect, to meet expectations she'd created in her own head. She told me about the envy she felt of friends who had brilliant careers while she pretended to have a wonderful life that was just facade. I got lost trying to impress everyone, including you, and in the process, I lost who I really was. I shared with her my own insecurities, my own mistakes as a mother, maybe making things too easy, maybe rescuing when I should have let fall. We both made mistakes, Karen. But what's important is that now we're here, having this conversation, doing things differently. Close to midnight, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter, Karen hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom, even when I deserved for you to give up." I held her face between my hands and looked deep into her eyes. Mothers don't give up, Karen, but mothers also need to protect themselves, and that's what I did. I protected myself so I could continue being a mother in a healthy way, not in a destructive way. She nodded, finally understanding. That conversation was painful. It was raw. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also liberating, because for the first time in our relationship, we'd been completely honest with each other. No masks, no manipulations, no games. Just 2 women, mother and daughter, trying to fix something that had been broken for a long time. When we finally went inside, I felt different, more whole somehow. Karen also seemed different, not completely healed, because healing takes time, but on the right path. She'd seen rock bottom, had lost everything, had been confronted with her own failures, and instead of running or blaming others, she was taking responsibility. That was the real change. Not dramatic, not instant, but genuine. And as I got ready for bed that night, I thought about Lucas, my son who continued in silence, too proud or too ashamed to ask for help. Would he also need to fall completely before understanding? Would this emotional story of redemption also be waiting for him, or would his pride sink him for good? I didn't know. But one thing I knew, if he came, I'd be ready. Ready to have the difficult conversations, ready to set boundaries, ready to love without destroying myself in the process. 3 months after that transformative conversation with Karen, while she continued rebuilding her life with firm and genuine steps, something inside me began to awaken. It was a Saturday morning. I was having coffee on the porch and reading the local Austin newspaper when I came across a story that made me stop. A 68-year-old lady had been found alone in her apartment, victim of family neglect. Her adult children hadn't visited in months, and she'd suffered hardships without anyone noticing. The story squeezed my heart in a visceral way. I thought, how many Evelyns are out there? How many elderly mothers, dedicated grandmothers, women who gave everything for their families and are now invisible, forgotten, treated like burdens? It was in that moment, with my coffee cup trembling in my hand, that an idea began to take shape in my head. An idea that would change not just my life, but the lives of many other women. I scheduled a meeting with Margaret, Dorothy, and Susan, my friends from the tea club who'd been my safe harbor throughout this entire journey. We met at a cozy cafe in downtown Austin, and when I shared my idea with them, I saw all 3 of their eyes light up. I want to create something, I began, feeling emotion growing in my voice. A space, an organization, something that supports women like us. Older women who've been neglected by their families, who sacrificed everything and are now alone, lost, thinking they have no value. I want to give voice to these invisible women. Margaret clapped enthusiastically, Dorothy had tears in her eyes, and Susan was already grabbing her phone to take notes. Evelyn, this is brilliant and necessary. You know how many women in our community go through exactly what you went through? I knew, and that's why I needed to do something. In the following months, I worked tirelessly to get this idea off the ground. I researched how to open a nonprofit organization, consulted lawyers, talked to social workers and psychologists. I used part of my savings, that money that was finally staying with me after I stopped bankrolling my children, to rent a small but welcoming space in a central area of Austin. It was a simple place, with 2 large rooms, a communal kitchen, and a backyard garden. We painted the walls in soft, cheerful colors, put in comfortable couches, bookshelves, and created an environment that felt like home. And we gave it a name, Invisible Women Foundation. The name was deliberate, direct, impactful, because that's exactly what we were, invisible. And it was time for us to become visible. The foundation would offer 3 main pillars of support. First, psychological support. Group and individual therapy with volunteer professionals who understood the specific issues of older women dealing with family abandonment and loss of identity. Second, social activities, crafts classes, yoga, dance, book club, group outings, anything that would pull these women out of isolation and create community. And third, financial education, because many of these women had been dependent on husbands or children their whole lives and didn't know how to manage their own finances. We wanted to empower, not just console. We wanted to transform pain into strength, invisibility into powerful presence. And man, the community's response was beyond anything I could have imagined. The grand opening was on a sunny Saturday in April. We spread flyers around the city, made posts on local social media, and waited anxiously to see if anyone would show up. When I opened the doors at 9 in the morning, there was already a line of women waiting, women of all ages, some in their 50s, others over 80, each carrying their own story of abandonment, neglect, invisibility. I saw tears, hugs, shy smiles from those who'd finally found a place where they were seen. A lady named Ruth, 72 years old, hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for seeing us." Those simple words broke me and filled me with purpose at the same time. I'd found my mission. It wasn't just being a mom or grandma anymore. It was being a voice for the voiceless, light for the invisible. In the first few months, we regularly served about 40 women, each one with a true story that would break your heart. There was Linda, who'd raised 5 children alone, and now none of them visited her. There was Gloria, whose husband had died, and the kids were fighting over the inheritance while she lived in a tiny studio apartment. There was Betty, who'd been the main caregiver for her grandchildren for years and was discarded when the kids grew up. Stories of ungrateful sons, gold-digger daughters-in-law, and sons-in-law, families that only showed up when they needed something. And hearing these stories, realizing I wasn't alone in this pain, was simultaneously devastating and healing. We created a safe space where these women could speak without judgment, cry without shame, and begin rebuilding their lives and identities. The group therapy sessions were intense and transformative. We'd sit in a circle every Thursday afternoon, facilitated by Dr. Martinez, an incredible psychologist specializing in aging issues and family dynamics. The women would share their stories, and I'd see faces recognizing each other. That look of, "You too?" I thought it was just me. We talked about guilt, about how we'd been conditioned to believe our value was in serving others. We talked about boundaries, about self-love, about the right to exist beyond the role of mother or wife. And slowly, week after week, I saw transformations happening. Women who arrived hunched over, ashamed, started walking with their heads held high. Women who hadn't smiled in months started laughing again. The social activities brought a lightness that many of these women hadn't felt in years. We organized painting classes, and women who'd never picked up a brush created beautiful works, expressing emotions they didn't even know existed. We did ballroom dancing classes, and ladies in their 70s were spinning around the room with wide smiles on their faces. We created a community garden in the back, where we'd plant flowers and vegetables together, dirty with soil but happy, connected with something alive and growing. And the outings. Oh, the outings! We'd go to museums, parks, live music shows, places many of them had never visited because they'd always been busy taking care of everyone except themselves. Seeing these women experiencing life again was the most rewarding thing I'd ever done. Financial education was perhaps the most empowering pillar. We hired a financial consultant named Rachel who taught these women how to budget, invest, protect their savings. Many of them had been financially controlled their whole lives and had no idea how to manage money. Others, like me, had given everything to their children and now needed to learn to save for themselves. Rachel taught not just the how, but the why it was important to have financial independence, why saving money wasn't selfishness, why investing in yourself was an act of self-love. I saw women who thought it was too late starting to make plans for the future, opening savings accounts, some even starting small businesses. It was empowerment in action, and it was beautiful to see. The foundation started gaining visibility in the Austin community. The local newspaper did a story about us. A radio station invited me for an interview, and donations started coming in, small but consistent. People from the city who had mothers or grandmothers in similar situations contributed what they could. Local businesses donated materials for our activities. And most importantly, more women kept showing up, seeking this space of healing and community. What started as an idea on a Saturday morning had transformed into something real, tangible, transformative. And I, this elderly mother who'd felt invisible for so long, was now more visible than ever. Not because of pain, but because of purpose. Not because of humiliation, but because of mission. And while I flourished in this new role, my phone buzzed with a message I'd both feared and expected. "Mom, it's Lucas. I need to talk to you, please." I looked at that message on my phone for long minutes, my heart beating erratically in my chest. "I need to talk to you, please." That word, please, was something Lucas rarely used with me. My son had always been proud, stubborn, that type of person who'd rather suffer in silence than admit he needed help. It had been almost 6 months since I'd cut off financial support. 6 months of absolute silence from his end. While Karen had broken down and sought help, Lucas had simply disappeared. He didn't answer calls, responded to messages with monosyllables, maintained an icy distance. And now, suddenly, this message. My fingers trembled as I typed, "You can come to my house tomorrow afternoon. I'll be waiting." The response came instantly. "Thank you, Mom. I'll be there at 2. I spent the entire night awake, tossing and turning in bed, thinking about all possible scenarios. Was Lucas coming to ask for money? Was he coming angry to blame me for everything that had gone wrong in his life? Or would it be different? Would it be like Karen had been, humble, broken, finally ready to take responsibility? Dr. Patterson had prepared me for this moment, reminded me to keep firm boundaries no matter what happened. But you know how it is. Theory is one thing. Practice is something completely different. This was my son, the boy I held in my arms, who I cared for when he was sick, who I protected from everything. Seeing a child suffer, is one of the hardest things that exists, even when you know that suffering is necessary for their growth. And I knew Lucas had suffered. I could feel it. When the doorbell rang exactly at 2 in the afternoon, my stomach turned. I took 3 deep breaths, a technique I'd learned in yoga, and went to open the door. The man standing in front of me was a ghost version of my son. Lucas had always been handsome, tall, that type of guy who drew attention when he entered a room. But the man at my door was unrecognizable. He'd lost about 10 pounds easily. His beard was long and unkempt, his eyes sunken and dull. He wore an old t-shirt and torn jeans, not that fashionable torn, but torn from actual wear. And when he looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen in my son: total defeat. "Hi, Mom," he said, with a hoarse voice, almost inaudible. "Hi, son. Come in." He entered slowly, as if afraid to invade a space that was no longer his. He sat on the couch with slumped shoulders, hands trembling slightly. I offered water, coffee, tea. He refused everything, just staring at the floor. The silence was heavy, suffocating, full of years of unsaid things. Finally, I sat in the armchair across from him and said gently, "Tell me what's happening, Lucas." He took a deep breath, and when he lifted his eyes to me, they were full of tears. My son, who'd always been so tough, so proud, was crying. "I lost everything, Mom. Everything. The house was foreclosed by the bank 2 months ago. The car was repossessed. I lost my job because I couldn't concentrate on anything. I'm sleeping on Jake's couch, a friend, but he's about to kick me out because he can't stand supporting me anymore." Tears started rolling down his face uncontrollably, and he didn't even try to wipe them. "I tried, Mom. I swear I tried to fix it alone. I tried to get work, tried to get a loan, tried to sell the few things I had left. But everything I built, it wasn't real construction, was it? It was just facade. It was you holding everything up from underneath, and me pretending I was the successful guy, self-sufficient." He sobbed, covering his face with his hands. "And the worst part is I knew. Deep down, I always knew. But it was easier to pretend. It was easier to accept your money and live the lie than to admit I was nothing like I pretended to be." Hearing my son confess that was devastating. I didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel, "I told you so." I just felt pain for him, for us, for all that waste. "Lucas, why did you take so long to talk to me? Why did you suffer alone all these months?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the emotional storm inside me. He wiped his face with his shirt sleeve and answered, his voice full of shame. "Because I was ashamed, Mom. Ashamed to admit you were right. Ashamed to confess that those horrible things I said at that dinner, about you being an emotional burden, about needing to live your life, were just me projecting my own insecurities. I said that because I felt threatened every time you called, every time you asked how I was, because I knew it was a lie, knew I wasn't okay, but didn't want to admit it." He paused, swallowing hard. "And also because I was too proud to ask for help, to admit I needed my mother." I felt tears starting to fall down my face, too. Seeing your son broken is terrible, but somehow I knew it was necessary. It was the rock bottom Lucas needed to hit to finally wake up. "Son, you hurt me deeply at that dinner. You and your sister. You accused me of things that weren't true, treated me as if I were a problem to be managed. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, because it did. It hurt in a way I can't even describe." Lucas nodded, sobbing. "I know, Mom. I know. And I'm sorry. So sorry. I was an ungrateful, selfish, cruel son. You gave me everything: education, opportunities, unconditional support, and I threw it all in your face. I have no excuse, no justification. I just wanted you to know I finally understand. I understand what you did for me my whole life, and I understand how much I wasted." We sat there, both crying, 2 wounded hearts finally beginning to truly communicate. After a few minutes, I composed myself and said, "Lucas, I love you. I always loved you. I always will. But love doesn't mean I'm going to solve your problems. Not this time. You're an adult man, capable, intelligent. You can get back on your feet alone. And that's what you need to do. Alone. Not because I don't care, but because it's the only way for you to build something real, something that's truly yours." I saw panic cross his face. "Mom, I'm not asking for money, I swear. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I understood, that I recognize everything I did wrong, and that I'm sorry. I got up from the armchair and sat next to him on the couch, holding his large, calloused hands. I know you're not asking for money, and I appreciate that. But Lucas, you need more than my forgiveness. You need to forgive yourself. You need to stop living with shame and start living with purpose. You made mistakes? You did. But who doesn't? What matters is what you do from now on. He looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair. I don't know where to start, Mom. I'm completely lost. I don't have a house, don't have a job, don't have anything. How do I get out of this hole? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. You start small, one day at a time. Get any job. Doesn't have to be your dream job. Just has to be honest. Live in a simple place, within your means. Live with humility until you can live with dignity. I can help you emotionally, I continued, squeezing his hands. I can listen to you, give you advice, support you morally. But financially? No, Lucas. You need to build that alone. And I know you can, because you're my son. And I didn't raise a weak man. I raised a strong man who just needs to remember that. I saw something change in his face. It wasn't complete relief, but it was acceptance. He was understanding. I'll do it, Mom. I'll prove to you and to myself that I can. That I'm not that failed guy who depends on his mother for everything. It's going to be hard. It's going to hurt. But I'll do it. And for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw a spark in his eye. Small, fragile, but there. It was determination. It was the will to start over. Lucas stayed a few more hours with me that afternoon. We talked about everything. About his father, about the mistakes I also made as a mother, about the patterns we created without realizing. He told me about the last months, about the nights he spent awake hating himself, about how he hit rock bottom and stayed there for weeks without seeing a way out. But one thing that pulled me out was thinking about you, he said. I thought about how you raised us alone after Dad died, about how you never gave up, even when everything was difficult. And I thought, if my mother could do it, I can too. That filled me with pride, mixed with sadness. Pride because he was finally seeing me. Sadness because it took so much suffering to get there. When he left, it was already getting dark. We hugged at the door, and it was a different hug. Not goodbye, but a new beginning. Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom. Even when I deserved for you to give up, he whispered. Mothers don't give up, son. But mothers also can't carry their children forever. At some point, you need to walk alone. He nodded, wiped his face one more time, and walked to his friend's borrowed car. I watched him leave, and my heart was heavy, but hopeful. Lucas had hit rock bottom. He'd felt the pain of total humiliation, of losing everything he pretended to have. But unlike before, he was taking responsibility. He was growing. And as I closed the door and went back inside my house, I thought, will this true story of rebuilding finally have a happy ending? Or is there still more pain ahead before complete healing? Only time would tell. But one thing I knew, I'd done my part. Now it was up to them. The months that followed that visit from Lucas were an exercise in patience, faith, and caution. Because true healing doesn't happen overnight, you know? It's not like in the movies where there's that emotional conversation, everyone cries, hugs, and boom, everything's fixed. Real life is slower, more complicated, full of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Lucas kept in touch with me, but this time it was different. He'd call to ask how I was, not to ask for something. He'd send messages sharing small victories, got a job as a cashier at a supermarket in San Antonio, rented a room in a shared apartment, started paying off his debts little by little. And you know what impressed me most? He never asked for a cent, not once. My son was finally learning to walk on his own 2 feet, and as much as I wanted to make things easier, I knew I couldn't. I needed to let him grow. Karen, on the other hand, was flourishing in a way I never imagined possible. She'd enrolled in the veterinary technician course and was loving every minute. She'd work during the day at the clinic, study at night, and on weekends she'd spend quality time with the girls. Without the pressure of keeping up appearances, without the toxic marriage with David, she'd become a lighter, more authentic version of herself. The girls, Lily and Sophie, were thriving too, making friends at public school, happier without the heavy atmosphere at home. And David? Well, he'd simply disappeared, didn't pay child support, didn't visit his daughters. But you know something? Karen was handling it with a maturity that made me deeply proud. She didn't complain, didn't try to use the girls as a weapon, She just moved forward, building a real life this time. The Invisible Women Foundation continued growing and becoming more and more the center of my life. We'd expanded to a larger space, got funding from some local companies, and now we regularly served over 100 women. Each story I heard, each transformation I witnessed, filled me with purpose. Seeing women who arrived broken, invisible, start to shine again was the most rewarding thing in the world. And the most incredible part? Some of them started volunteering, helping other women who arrived in the same state they'd arrived in. It was a cycle of healing and empowerment that kept multiplying. Ruth, that 72-year-old lady who'd hugged me on the first day, now coordinated the crafts group. Linda organized the outings. Gloria gave cooking classes. Women who felt useless were now essential to the community we created together. One day, about 5 months after Lucas's visit, I got a phone call from him that completely surprised me. "Mom, I wanted to invite you to something. If you want to come, I'd love for you to be there." My heart raced. "Of course, son. What is it?" He paused, and I heard nervousness in his voice. "I'm 3 months sober. I started attending Alcoholics Anonymous because I realized my problems weren't just financial, they were deeper. And next week I'm going to receive my 3-month chip. I know it's not much, but it would be really important to me if you were there." Immediate tears filled my eyes. Lucas was doing deep work, not just fixing finances, but healing internal wounds. "I'll be there, son. I'll definitely be there." The AA meeting was at a small church in San Antonio. I entered nervously, not knowing what to expect, and Lucas greeted me with a tight hug. The room was full of people of all ages, all there fighting their own battles against addiction. When it was Lucas's turn to speak, he went up front with his 3-month chip in hand and began, "My name is Lucas and I'm an alcoholic. I drank to forget my life was a lie, to have the courage to keep pretending I was someone I wasn't. And I lost everything because of it. House, car, dignity. But the most important thing I almost lost was my mother." He looked at me, eyes shining. "She's here today, and that means everything to me, because she could have given up on me, should have given up, but she didn't. She loved me enough to let me fall, and that saved me." I cried there, in front of all those strangers, proud of the man my son was becoming. After the meeting, Lucas took me to see the little room where he lived. It was small, simple, furnished with only the essentials, a bed, a small table, a chair. But it was clean, organized, and had something his previous places never had. It was truly his, earned with his own sweat, paid with his own salary. "I know it's not much," he said, a bit embarrassed, "but it's honest. It's mine." I held his face between my hands and said, "Son, this here is worth more than any mansion built on top of lies. I'm so proud of you I can't even express it." We had lunch together at a cheap but good restaurant, and for the first time in years, we had a real conversation. Not about problems, not about money, but about dreams, about who he wanted to become, about the plans he was making to rebuild his life brick by brick. Karen also continued surprising me. She'd started therapy not just individual, but also family therapy with the girls, working through issues of paternal abandonment and creating a healthy emotional foundation for them. On a Sunday afternoon, she came to me with eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I met someone." My heart jumped, part hope, part fear. "Tell me more." She smiled, shy. "His name is Michael. He's a veterinarian at the clinic where I work. He's kind, patient, and, Mom, he treats me with respect. He doesn't want to impress me with expensive things or empty promises. He just wants to really get to know me." Seeing my daughter finally understanding what a healthy relationship was filled me with joy. "Take your time, my daughter. Get to know him well. And this time, choose with a free heart, not with the need to fill a void." The reconciliation with my children wasn't perfect, wasn't complete, but it was real. We started having Sunday dinners again, but this time they were different. There wasn't that climate of obligation, of unspoken tension. It was genuine. Lucas would show up with food he'd bought himself to contribute. Karen would help in the kitchen, teaching the girls to cook too. And we'd talk about everything, without masks, without pretenses. We'd talk about past mistakes without bitterness, just as lessons learned. We'd laugh together, something we hadn't done in years. And the children, oh, my beautiful granddaughters, were growing up seeing a healthier family dynamic, learning different values from the ones their parents had learned. I was breaking the cycle, and that was everything. At one of these Sunday dinners, almost a year after everything had started with that fateful dinner, Lucas and Karen gave me a gift. It was a frame with a photo of us, the three of us together, truly smiling, and underneath an engraved plaque, "To the strongest woman we know, thank you for teaching us to grow. We love you, Karen and Lucas." I cried like a child. These weren't empty words. It wasn't manipulation. It was genuine recognition, true gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me," I managed to say between sobs. Karen hugged one side, Lucas the other, and there, squeezed between my two adult children, I felt we'd finally arrived where we needed to be. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still difficult moments, but it was real. It was solid. It was true love, not dependence, disguised as love. The Invisible Women Foundation ended up becoming news even outside Austin. A TV station from Dallas did a report about our work, and suddenly we were getting calls from women in other cities wanting to know how to create something similar in their communities. I started giving lectures, workshops, sharing not just the foundation's model, but my own emotional story. And you know what I discovered? That telling my story of pain, of humiliation, of rebirth, helped other women find courage to tell theirs. My vulnerability became my strength. My past invisibility became my present platform, and that was powerful in a way I never imagined. Looking back at everything that happened since that fateful Sunday dinner, I realized that losing everything was necessary to gain what really mattered. I lost the illusion of a perfect family, but gained a real family. I lost the false peace of always giving in, but gained the true peace of having healthy boundaries. I lost the identity of a mother who erases herself, but gained the identity of a complete woman, multifaceted, with purpose beyond motherhood. And my children? They lost the false safety net, but gained their own dignity, true strength, character built through struggle. We didn't lose each other. We just needed to lose ourselves first to truly find each other. And now, walking side by side, no longer with them on my back, but together as equals, I finally understood what it meant to be a true family. Not perfect, but real, honest, and full of love that had been tested by fire and came out stronger on the other side. And that's how we learn, right? Sometimes we need to let the people we love fall, not because we don't care, but precisely because we care too much. Because true love isn't carrying anyone on your back until you break. True love is walking side by side, respecting each other's boundaries, recognizing each other's value. I didn't lose my children in this journey. I found them for real. And more importantly, I found myself. Today, when I look back, I'm not angry about that Sunday dinner that changed everything. I'm grateful, because that's where I stopped being invisible. That's where I decided I deserved respect, dignity, and a life of my own. And you know something? Every woman deserves that. Every mother, every grandmother, every woman who gives so much she forgets to exist, deserves to be seen, valued, respected. And you? Have you been through something similar to what I went through? Have you felt invisible within your own family? Or maybe you recognize you were ungrateful to someone who gave you everything? What would you do if you were in my place at that dinner? Tell me in the comments. I read them all, and believe me, your story can help someone else who's going through the same thing right now. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in some piece of it, or if you simply believe more people need to hear about women who find their strength after so much pain, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we share life lessons, reflections about our choices, our relationships, about who we choose to be when everything falls apart. And every week, there's a new emotional story that'll make you think, feel, and maybe even change something in your own life. Thank you for staying here with me until the end. Thank you for listening to me. And remember, you're never invisible. Never. Sometimes, you just need to remember your own light.